absolute answers, don't over reassure, but you need to respond quickly. So lesson 4 is basically crisis communicators must communicate early and often following a crisis, regardless of whether they have critical information about the crisis. And of course, how early is early? The book doesn't say. There is, I mean, it's always contextual. As I said, sometimes it's immediate. If there's an immediate danger to your stakeholders, obviously, if you find out that your burrito is tainted, we can't have it tainted. Or if we realize or hear that there are wild monkeys loose in Colombia. Finnegan just looked over here. Then we need to get the word out pretty quickly about those wild monkeys, because they're going to get you. But it's also contextual, right? So, but the idea is earlier, the better. Don't wait. Don't be Domino's Pizza. They waited too long to get onto YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Earlier, the better. Okay. Then they move to a section on stakeholders. And by the way, there's tons of stuff about the impact of a crisis uncertainty on stakeholders. And this is page 95. And we're moving away from the first 4 lessons, which are generally about crisis, uncertainty and crisis, to more sort of specific ideas for practitioners. Though the first 4 seem practical as well. In any case. And then, lo and behold, on page 95, they define stakeholders. Didn't we already define stakeholders and like primary and secondary stakeholders? This is, as I say, I don't know. You can tell sometimes when people co-write books like these folks do, sometimes they actually work together. Sometimes certain people are responsible for certain chapters, and they don't oftentimes jive with other chapters, so you can't tell who wrote what chapter, but I'm guessing they didn't work together. And then the editor should have looked back and say, oh, by the way, you already have defined stakeholders, blah, blah, blah. That could be sort of confusing. But anyway, maybe it's just a reminder. Stakeholders are any groups of people, internal or external to an organization, who have a stake. Like a little whistle. Stake. What's the Irish spring? How's it go? Clean as a whistle. But in any case, who have a stake in the actions of the organization, such as employees, customers, creditors, government regulator agencies, the media, competitors, blah, 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 blah. And stakeholders can be very vocal following in crisis. No kidding. So they go through all this sort of song and dance. Stakeholders gotta know. I want to know what you're thinking. There's some things you can't hide. Something like that. They gotta know. They want to know. I think the clearest paragraph in here that's very, very helpful is the very short paragraph in the middle of page 96. So they have a lot of various examples where they're trying to sort of flesh out the need for stakeholders to know and all that type of stuff, and they know. So basically, this is what it says. As was illustrated in the foregoing examples, public arguments will be made by many stakeholders concerning who is responsible, what people should do, who is affected, and how the victims should be compensated. Uncertainty and confusion can be increased when stakeholders disagree about important questions surrounding the crisis. Yeah, and it also goes back to framing and stuff like that. So basically what they are doing here is they're setting up, because there's no lesson in this section, they're setting up their huge discussion about a very important term here for them in this particular chapter: communication ambiguity. And that moves to the next section. So again, they haven't gotten to their lesson yet. They're just sort of setting it up by saying stakeholders want to know, and they're going to make public arguments about all this type of stuff, and it's going to increase the The uncertainty, and so basically such a heightened uncertainty and disagreements about important questions regarding the crisis can create multiple interpretations about the same event, or what we refer to as communication ambiguity. Lots of interpretations. Gotta have a handle on that though. So the next section, managing communication ambiguity. They define communication ambiguity again, basically, as this is from Week. We define communication ambiguity as multiple interpretations of a crisis event. In the simplest terms, due to the uncertainty of crisis, there is not a clear-cut, precise answer to every important question following a crisis. Just so you know, I'm doing a lecture, so my watch is kind of. But in any case, in the simplest terms, due to the uncertain crisis, there is not a clear-cut, precise answer to every important question following a crisis. As a result, each stakeholder group, including customers, workers, and the impacted public, may hold and express different viewpoints of the event. No doubt. Okay. So basically, what they talk about here is intentionally heightening the level of ambiguity is bad. A lot of folks tend to think that. Well, we don't know what's going on, or we don't want people to know what's going on. Some people talk about strategic ambiguity, making things, intensifying the ambiguity. They say that is bad. We already have uncertainty. We don't want to create more uncertainty and more confusion. That's when we have the big panics. That's when people go, ah! So basically, they talk about what they think is ethical. And the little bullet points here on page 97, I think, are really, really important. Ambiguity is ethical when it contributes to the complete understanding of an issue by posting alternative views that are based on complete and unbiased data that aim to inform. And the flip side of that, ambiguity is unethical if it poses alternative interpretations using biased or incomplete information that aims to deceive. So you want good information aimed to inform, not bad information aimed to deceive. In any case, they go through some examples and things like that, and they talk about Kessler or whatever, whoever this dude was for the tobacco industry. So thank you for smoking. Have you not seen that movie? It's a brilliant movie. But in any case. So, the lesson here, they finally get to lesson number 5. Organizations should not purposely heighten the ambiguity of a crisis to deceive or distract the public. That is bad. And then, what they do, again, with dealing with this ambiguity, so I mean, there's a lot of stuff about this issue of ambiguity. They talk about how with all these different levels of ambiguity, we have to be ready to answer certain things. And so they have 3 different areas of ambiguity. And so table 5.1 is actually really, really important. And the book offers some examples here. But basically, there's going to be ambiguity over the evidence. So whose scientific evidence should the public believe? There's going to be ambiguity over intent. Did the organization knowingly commit the crisis? There's going to be ambiguity about responsibility. Did the crisis originate within or outside the organization? So in light of all this type of stuff, basically they have some very, very clear and practical lessons. Lesson 6, lesson 7, and lesson number 8. Lesson 6, be prepared to defend your interpretation of the evidence surrounding a crisis. This is good evidence. This is how we're interpreting the evidence. This is good. We're good. The other people, no. Lesson number 7, without good intentions prior to a crisis, recovery is difficult or impossible. And so that's also, this going back to issues of ethics and having goals and all that type of stuff, and having a good rapport with the community and establishing those equal partnerships with stakeholders and everything like that. And so you have to have good intentions, and hopefully, if you knowingly created something to create the crisis or did something that's bad, you're going to have a tough time dealing with that. And then the last one, lesson 8, If you believe you are not responsible for a crisis, you need to build a case for who is responsible and why, which I thought was sort of interesting, because they also say don't place blame. But I guess, people are blaming you and it's not your fault. You can say, here are the reasons why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then they have a little table 5.2, crisis and uncertainty, which is sort of confusing. I think they're just sort of setting themselves up. I mean, they talk about the table on the bottom of 100, and that recap is actually pretty good. But basically, again, they're talking about lesson 6, 7, and 8, and all this idea about communication ambiguity. And so they say, to recap, communication ambiguity is a central factor in managing any type of crisis. Due to the uncertainty crises, due to the inherent uncertainty of crises, there will be multiple interpretations and arguments made about the severity of the crisis, how the crisis was caused, who is affected, and whether organizations are responsible for the event. See Table 5.2. The lessons in this section suggest that crisis communicators should be ready and willing to defend their interpretation of the crisis, to practice good, honest, ethical conduct before and after a crisis develops, and to make sure they build a case for why they are not responsible for the crisis, if indeed they are not. So some good lessons there. I'll get to Table 5.2 later because it's sort of confusing, because you can't really understand it until you get through the entire chapter. So as I just said, the next slide says recap on the bottom of page 100 is very important, and Table 5.2 is confusing, but again, calm ambiguity is big and important, a huge part of this chapter. Then they move to a section, a very brief section on training, simulations, and uncertainty. And they again talk about Table 5.2. And so basically what they do here is they have these key issues of uncertainty in this table. Unanswered questions. Okay, yeah, that leads to uncertainty. Organization, they want to know who, what, why, how. Stakeholders, they want to know who, what, why, how. The need for information, both for the organization and stakeholders, high. We gotta have the information. Ambiguity, organization is high. Stakeholders, they're confused. They don't know, but sometimes they'll just sort of, try to create rumors. And then the thing with personal beliefs, the organization says it's collapsed. Stakeholder says it's collapsed. That doesn't make sense yet until you actually go to the next section, and I'll talk about that in a second. But that Table 5.2 is sort of helpful theoretically to think about all this stuff about communication ambiguity. But basically what they say here is that, through trainings and simulations, you can sort of train yourself to deal with issues of uncertainty. And the big lesson here is, organizations need to prepare for uncertainty through simulations and training. Isn't that magical? And so that's all they're really studying. They have some examples here, but if you're an organization, what you need to be doing is training folks, doing simulations and all that type of stuff, again, to sort of, even though we'll still be faced with uncertainty, given a specific crisis, you can sort of train yourself to figure out how to deal with that uncertainty. Of course, they don't say exactly much about, they don't give us lessons exactly, how to create simulations and all that type of stuff, but in any case, that's in there. Then they finally get to belief structures and uncertainty. And, well, this is, I saw the cosmology episodes. I thought cosmetology episodes, but in any case, and that's where we just make up stuff. But in any case, so when they talk about belief structures and uncertainty, and this is why they say in Table 2 that the personal beliefs are being collapsed, both for organization and stakeholder, is that we have, during these moments of uncertainty, these cosmology episodes. So what do they mean by all that type of stuff? Well, folks are traumatized. They say this cosmology episode is wherein uncertainty creates a disorienting experience in which beliefs and sense-making structures are severely hampered. These belief structures are severely impacted by the epistemic uncertainty we discussed at the beginning of this chapter, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you just don't know what's going on. And so that means you're sort of like we're zombies. We're in a haze. We don't know what's going on. And it basically says that crisis organizations also experience collapses of their belief structures. Even though they said in the ethics, chapter that we always have to have these belief systems through credos and everything like